Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photography the Great. Last time we started out taking a look at the Sony A7 and A7R, and I kind of went through all the long and boring technical details about the differences between both cameras. I've had a little bit more time to shoot with both these cameras, and I now finally have got my hands on some of Sony's new FE lenses. Here for the past few days I've been shooting with the 35mm f2.8, and I kind of briefly shot with the 55mm f1.8 as well. Now I'm able to see a lot more things about both these cameras. So far I actually prefer the A7 a little bit more than the A7R, just because of the more accurate focusing. But of course we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. As I said before in part 1, this is definitely going to be a continuing sort of thing, because I'm very intrigued about these cameras and it's going to take me a little while to go through all the aspects of them. But today I want to go ahead and show you guys the cameras up close. I have the A7R today, and I have the 35mm 2.8 Zeiss lens. So anyways, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the camera. Okay, so taking a closer look at the camera, and before I actually said cameras, but as it turns out we're just looking at the A7R right now. As you guys know, both these cameras are pretty much identical clones as far as their control layout is concerned, so there's no need to look at both of them at this point. We will be taking a look at the A7 as well in more detail later on, specifically whenever we start talking about the differences in focus systems, so definitely stay tuned for that. Okay though, taking a closer look here, and yeah, this is the 35mm f2.8 FE Zeiss lens, and so far this is my favorite lens that I've tried for this mount. The 55mm 1.8 is nice also, but for my use I prefer the 35. It's definitely more akin to just more walk around type shooting, and yeah, you know, I just kind of like it a little bit better. It has an interesting hood design on it. The lens cap actually goes on over this hood, and it's actually a 40.5mm cap, but then whenever you take off the hood like this, that reveals a 49mm filter size, so kind of an interesting design. And I'll talk more about this lens later on. The most interesting part of this camera to me is the top. A lot of people were noticing how it's very similar to the Sony RX1, except it's got one more dial up here. I haven't had an opportunity to shoot with the RX1, so I can't comment on that firsthand. But yeah, I mean, the top of this camera is a little bit busy, and I was kind of concerned about that whenever I took this out of the box, but as I used the camera more, I actually found it to be very similar to using the A7, which is a camera that I actually liked. Well, control-wise, of course. Shooting in manual, basically how this works is you've got your front dial up here, and that front dial is what changes our f-stop, and then we have another dial that's right back there, and that's used to change our shutter speed. And my personal favorite, the back dial here, actually is used for ISO. So in a lot of ways this is actually easier to use than most DSLRs, even really high-end ones like, you know, the Canon 5D3 and Nikon D800 and, you know, 1DX, etc. All those cameras, usually you have to press and hold a button before you change ISO, so I actually like being able to change ISO fairly quickly here. And by some miracle that I'm very grateful for, actually it's not a miracle, it's just Sony actually listening to their customers, they actually have given us the ability to use automatic ISO in manual mode now. So yeah, this is something that's very great, because there's a lot of times when I'm shooting, and you guys probably have run into this as well, a lot of times when you're shooting you're really more concentrated about, you know, getting a specific shutter speed or aperture, and you may not necessarily have time to fiddle with the ISO. So being able to use automatic ISO when you're shooting full manual is something that's very nice. This is something that was not available to us on cameras like the AX7 and A77, for example. So it's very nice to see it on the A7R and A7. If we take a look at our LCD screen here, it is a 3-inch display. It is much higher resolution. So just like most of the newer cameras that have come out now, it is a display with over 1 million dots. It is an articulated display. So you can see that we can shoot and use it more of as a waist level viewfinder type deal. And it doesn't quite go all the way down in this position, but it comes very close. So we can use it for some overhead shooting as well that way. It would be nice to have a swiveling screen, but obviously I realize that this camera, with it being the size it is, I realize that there's a lot of physical limitations. So yeah, you know, no swivel, but a little bit of movement is better than none at all. Over on this side of the camera, we have our connections here. And the more you look at this camera, the more you realize that this really is a proper camera. I mean, it's very much in the same league as any of the other higher end full frame cameras that we see on the market these days. So just as we'd expect, we have a microphone input there. We have a headphone jack for monitoring our sound. We have this multi connection here, which is a USB based connection. So Sony, they make a wired cable release for this camera. And as you guys know, this is also the way you charge this camera. Now, I've thought more about this whole USB charging situation, and you know, a couple commenters pointed out in the comments on the part 1 of this video that, you know, it's nice to be able to use like an external type USB charger to charge this. Like if you have, like, for example, a small battery pack like this one, you know, you could actually plug a USB cable in and charge the camera that way. So I definitely see the advantage of something like that. And so yeah, I really am actually glad that Sony included the USB charging ability. I just think that I just wish that they had included their actual physical charger, you know, as well. Yeah, because I think it's kind of silly having to spend $50 to buy one of these on a camera at this price point. I think they should have just included both charging solutions with this. But anyways, just a minor gripe. And then lastly down here, we have our micro HDMI connector. So yeah, pretty comprehensive package there. And we don't have cheap Fisher Price doors like we do on the A3000. As I mentioned in part 1, this camera does use the NP-FW50 battery, so it uses a smaller battery there. Definitely pick up 1 or 2 extras, if I can put it in the right way. There we go. And then over here we have our card slot. The card goes in a little bit differently than you would expect. You can see that Sony is literally saving every little bit of space they can in this body. Normally your cards would go up and down, but they've done that just to save a little bit of space there. Pretty impressive if you ask me. Record button is over there. Some people have commented that they don't particularly care for that location. Because this body is very small, it does get a little busy on top, so I'm not really sure where Sony would have put it up there. And had they put it here, it probably would have been in a position where it would have been accidentally hit easily. So I think all in all it was a good place to put this. And of course, our viewfinder is the same very high resolution OLED type that we see in a lot of the other Sony models like the A7r. This camera does have a few different custom buttons that you can use. Whenever you're shooting, the trash can button down here is a C3 custom button. Then you've got C2 up here, and then you have C1 up on the top. I'm going to have to play with these a little bit more. I haven't done a whole lot with C2 and C3 yet. But C1 has been very useful because that is how the camera changes focus. So if you hit this button right here, you can move your focus point around, left, right, up, down. Kind of strange, the trash can button actually brings it to the center. You would expect that to be the middle button, so that's kind of different. If you rotate the dial here, you can go between your different focus modes. So you can go through, zone and center and so forth. And then notice that your flexible spot has 3 different sizes. So you've got a small size, you've got a medium size, and then you've got a large size. So far I found myself using the medium and the small most, and that seems to work out pretty well. So that's how that works. One control that was a little bit confusing to me, because I never really read the manual, it's more fun to play, is this switch right up here. You would think that this would be autofocus and manual focus, but actually what this does is it actually changes the purpose of this button. So as you can see, it's up on autofocus and manual focus now, and so what happens is if I press this button, this basically acts as a focus override. So what I can do is I can press and hold it, I can rotate my focus ring, and you can see that by doing so, I now have the ability to focus the camera like that. If it's down in this bottom position, pressing and holding it actually serves as an auto exposure lock. So let's see, as you can see here, the camera is changing our exposure. But if I press and hold now, star appears and it acts as an auto exposure lock. So kind of a dual purpose type control. Kind of strange though. I've never seen anything quite like that on any other camera, but it seems to work well enough. Going into the menu on this camera for the first time was actually very pleasant for me. I noticed that Sony actually simplified it a bit over their previous models. So now things are a little bit more condensed and a little bit more logically laid out than they were on cameras like the A99 and the A77 in my opinion. Very, very standard fare. It's very, very familiar if you've used a Sony before. And of course here is something noteworthy. We have the ability to do 60 frames a second in 1080, which is cool. The other thing that Sony has done a lot of lately, they've done a lot with their Wi-Fi. So this is something that we're going to be taking a look at later on. Maybe I should do like a really, really big like Wi-Fi roundup video to show you the Wi-Fi on a lot of different cameras, because it's something that needs more time. If you guys think that's a good idea, you may have to write me about that. But as you can see here, you can actually send to a smartphone, send to a computer. Then of course you have your NFC support here as well. The other thing that's cool is Sony actually has different apps that you can install directly on the camera itself. And so yeah, there's actually a little Sony app store for all their cameras now. And while there aren't very many apps, I see them adding a lot to that in the future, so that's something that's kind of cool. You can go in there, there's an app that you can download that's for remote shooting, and there's some that do, I believe that I saw an HDR one, and there's like an email one to be able to email photos straight from the camera, and there's all sorts of things. So something that's definitely unique. This has been a very unique year for new features on cameras. The other thing that I'll point out too is the fact that this camera also has HDMI out that supports uncompressed video out. So that's something else that makes it a very, very serious contender in terms of video. And of course this is also the new style shoe. So it's actually a standard type hot shoe. So if you're using like pocket wizards or radio poppers or anything like that, you can use those on here and not have to fiddle with that proprietary Minolta style hot shoe. Sony, they have incorporated some proprietary contacts back there though, so that way you still have a standard shoe, but Sony has some specialized accessories that will work with this camera also. Like for example, they have a microphone that has like XLR inputs and things like that that you can use with this type hot shoe. So pretty cool solution, I think, all in all. As I mentioned before, we're definitely going to look at this camera in more detail in the future. If there's anything specific that you guys have questions about or would like to see in future videos on this camera and the A7, definitely write me in the comments below. And I'm also going to put the link to the samples in this photo in this video description as well. I did shoot a few more samples with the A7R, and I'm going to upload those. And as I shoot more with this, I will continue to post samples, so be sure to periodically check on that. And definitely don't forget to subscribe, share my videos, and give me some feedback in the comments below. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, Photographer the Great, signing off.